Hello, everybody, and welcome Erev Shabbos Parshas Vayechi. So, I had this amazing story that I wanted to share with you all, and it connects to this week's parsha because in this week's parsha we see Yaakov Avinu gives all the brachos to his children, and this story I call it the tale of two blessings. Very interesting story, and I definitely would love your feedback as well. So, let me know how this story makes you feel and your thoughts, and looking forward. So there was a Yidla. His name was Nassim Shimon. Now, he was a good businessman. He used to travel around. He lived in Austria. He would travel around to Yassi, to Galitz, Chernovitz, and he lived in the city of Schatz. Now, he wasn't really such a God-fearing guy. You know, he did the mitzvahs, the basics, the minimum that he needed to keep, but he wasn't so into it. He was, he would make fun of tzaddikim and make fun of chassidim, but he was a good businessman. He traveled Austria, Romania, and he knew the guards and the border patrols and all these things, like, and he made a good parnasa for himself. Meanwhile, his wife Rachel, she was from a family of Hasidim that were Talmidim of Rameir of Premishlan, and she was mamish and Erlich Hayid, and she loved tzaddikim. And whenever he would go away on a big business trip, she would pack her stuff up and travel to the Holy Rameir of Premishlan. And you can imagine that her husband wasn't so into it. He would let her go, but Gewalt, he would make fun of it every single time, every chance he could get. And when she would come to Rameir of Premishlan, obviously she would ask for brachas and all different things, but the main thing she wanted was a child. Rachel and Nas and Shimon, they mamish didn't have any children. And every single time she would travel to the holy Rameir, Rameir would say, "I'm sorry, but I can't give you a bracha for children until you come with your husband." So what was she to do? She knew that he was never interested in coming. And every single time she'd come home from Premishlan, she'd always be sad, a little bit depressed, like, come on, when's the Rebbe going to give me a bracha already? And every single time she would ask, and she'd go back again and again. So finally, one time she comes to her mayor, and he says something different. He says, "I want you to go home right now. Your husband's on the way back from a business trip from Galitz. He's going to be home a little earlier than you expect him. Go home and tell him that I want him to come now to me." And she looks at him, at the rabbi, and before she even said, "Rabbi, he's never going to come," he said, and he's going to say he's not going to come. And tell him that 2 days ago, on the night of Lag BaOmer, he was at a party in where was it? A party in some Gaisha party, and he said, tell him that he was making a lot of fun of me, really talking disparagingly, really saying not nice things about me, and tell him that I want him to come right now. So Rachel comes home, and she gets home mamish minutes before Nas and Shimon walks in, and he comes into the house, and she goes, "Rameir said we have to go to him at once." And of course, he was like, "No way, I'm not going. Me going to a Rebbe? I'm not going to a Rebbe. I don't believe in these Rebbes and these miracles. Not going to happen. We're not going to get a kid from going to the Rebbe." And Rachel looks at him and she says, "He knows that you were at a party in this place, and that you were talking all sorts of bad things about him by this party to the Goyim. He wants you to come now." So that really shocked him. Can you imagine? Like a tzaddik knew all of his private affairs, even though it was really far away. So he says, "You don't think I'm going to go? Problem is, I don't want to just travel to Premishlan because all my friends know that I'm such a troublemaker, and I make fun of tzaddikim. Now suddenly I'm going to travel to Holy Rameir? No." He says, "You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take a coach to Lemberg, and then from Lemberg I'll travel to Premishlan, and all my friends will think that I'm just going on business to Lemberg." So Nathan Shimon travels, and he shows up, and he comes to Premishlan. He comes into the Rebbe, and Rameir looks at him and says, "Nu, what do you want?" And he says, "Rebbe, I want a son." And he drops fat wad of cash down and says, "Nu, you gonna give me a child?" And the Rebbe looks at him and says, "You telling me half truths? I told you to come from your house in Shots to me. You didn't come straight here. You went to Lemberg first. Why'd you go to Lemberg first? You want a bracha from me? You come from your house, go back to your house, go straight from your house to my house, and I'll give you a bracha. We'll talk." And Nas and Shimon was like, "Man, he knows everything I'm doing. I can't get away from this tzaddik." So Gewalt, he goes back home and he ends up getting busy. You can imagine. So from Lag BaOmer, and he turns to his wife and says, "Listen, we're going to go to the Rebbe for the Shabbos of Shabbos Nachamu, right? The Shabbos right after Tisha B'av. We're going to go to the Rebbe." And of course, you can imagine Rachel was mamish so happy, thanking Hashem. This is such an incredible thing. We're going to go together on Shabbos Nachamu. They head out on a Thursday. They get to Premishlan Friday morning. They come in, and and the Rebbe looks and goes, "Impressive, straight from Shots to Premishlan. I'm happy that you're here." So on Shabbos morning, the Rebbe gives a Nas and Shimon and Aliyah, and he comes up to the Torah, and the Rebbe himself is reading from the Torah. And in the Torah of that week's parsha, that week's Sedra, it says, "V'lo yeh b'cha akar v'akara." There will not be a barren person, somebody who doesn't have children. And when the Rebbe got up to Dafka to this pasuk, and it was in the Aliyah that this Yidla, Nas and Shimon, they gave him the Aliyah for that with that pasuk in it. And the Holy Rebbe Premishan goes, and he mamish and of course Nas and Shimon feels it. Everybody realizes, wow, this is mamish the bracha that he's giving him. So you know what happens after you get a special aliyah? When they give you a mishaberach, usually they give a big nedava, a big amount of money. And it comes up and the the yidula, what do you call it? And the shamish, whatever, the guy who's calling the chevra up, he's giving him a big mishaberach, and he's about to say, and he's gonna give a big donation, and of course, Nasan Shimon was ready to give a big donation, and suddenly, the Rebbe jumps in and he goes, because he promised to help a Yisrael, he promised to help a Yid, and everybody's like, okay. They finish the mishaberach, and everybody's curious. After davening by Kiddush, they're bringing out the lachaims and the herring and the gala and the liver. They're all sitting together. And the Rebbe Rameir calls over. He says, "Nu, Nas and Shimon, come over here." So Nas and Shimon comes over. And he says, "Let me tell you, I don't need your money. But here's what's going to happen. You have to be makabel on yourself right now. That when a Yid comes over to you, there's going to come a time when a tzaddik is going to need your help. A Yisrael is going to need your help. And it's going to come at great risk to you. If you accept now that you will do it, then you'll already have a kid right away. I promise you. Even before you have to do this thing, you'll have a child." And Nas and Shimon picks up L'chaim and he goes, "I promise I will be there to help Yisrael." And they all say L'chaim, L'chaim, and Gewalt. They come home, and Nas and Shimon and his wife Rachel, Baruch Hashem, she gets pregnant, and they have a baby in the next year. Meanwhile, a few years later, Nas and Shimon is, excuse me, a little sick. Nas and Shimon, mamish, he hears that Rabbi Yisrael of Rizhin was getting oppressed by the Russian police. And obviously, Rabbi Yisrael of Rizhin was a big tzaddik, but he had a lot of money. And the government didn't like it. And there were issues going on. So they wanted to sneak the holy Rabbi Yisrael of Rizhin. They wanted to sneak him out of Russia, out of Romania, and into Austria. They figured in Austria he'll be safe. So happens to be that this small group of the Rebbe and a bunch of Hasidim had reached a border city in Romania right next to Austria. Now, who happens to be in this city? Nas and Shimon. And Nas and Shimon hears the story, and he, of course, he knows all the border guards, and he's been traveling the border, and he knows also where to go to sneak over if you want to go over with stuff that you don't want the Chevra to know about. Just like a good smuggler, a good Jewish smuggler. And so the Nas and Shimon comes in. He says, "Listen, I can get the Rebbe across the border." He goes, "This must be the Yisrael that Rameir of Premishlan was talking about, the holy Rabbi Yisrael of Rizhin. Gewalt, is there any greater Yisrael?" Nas and Shimon thought to himself. So Rabbi Yisrael of Rizhin agreed, said, "Okay, I'm going to go with you." Now there's a little river that maybe it's not so little, but it forms a natural border between Austria and Romania. And it was a freezing night, and there was a layer of ice that had formed over the river. And Nas and Shimon told the rabbi, says, "Listen, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to take you, and we're going to cross over the river when it's frozen at night." Now, it wasn't completely frozen. Sometimes you go on a river that's mamish frozen over, and you're set to go. You could drive a truck over it. But Gewalt, this river was not that frozen. Maybe it was early in the winter. I don't know what the story was exactly, but it was not fully frozen. It was a scary and and very risky task, and with all the border patrols and everything. So Rabbi Yisrael says, listen, let's go over after midnight and we'll go together. So Nas and Shimon says, for sure, just the two of them. They come down to the river, and you can imagine sneaking through the forest, hiding from patrols. They come to the river, and Nas and Shimon says, listen, you've never crossed the river. I know how to cross on ice. I'm going to carry you on my back, and we're going to go slow. So you can imagine Nas and Shimon's mom is dripping with sweat, and one step, every step, he's testing the ice, because one false step, and he breaks through the ice, and that's the end of the two of them. Finally, they're mamish in the middle of the river, and Nas and Shimon stops. Mr. Rajin is hanging on his back, and he goes, what's going on? Why'd you stop? And Nas and Shimon says, it occurred to me that I spent a lot of my life doing only the minimum amount of mitzvahs and doing a lot of averos and making fun of a lot of tzaddikim. And I think it occurred to me right now that I better solidify my place in Gan Eden. We're right in the middle of a frozen river, and I want you to promise me that I'm going to have a place in Gan Eden. Now, you can imagine most of you are thinking, oh my God, that's such a chutzpah. You mamash, you got the tzaddik in a position where he can't say no. But you know what Rabbi Yisrael Leverjin said? He mamish, he got a big smile across his face and said, a yid like you? Nothing, Shimon, Reb Nothing, Shimon. Even at a time like this, we're scared from the patrols. We're worried that we're going to get caught by the border police on both sides. We're on a frozen river that we might crash through. And you're thinking about Olam Haba? Of course I'll promise you a place in Olam Haba. What a wonderful yid you are. Nothing, Shimon said, Shkoyach Rebbe, Mamash promised me a place in Gan Eden. And they continued going. And of course, they get to the other side, and they come to the Austrian border town of Kimpling. And Baruch Hashem, they were safe. And Nas and Shimon hurried on to Kasev, where Reb Chaimel, the brother Mechutin of Rabbi Yisrael, was there, and brings the good news. And Mamash, that there's nothing to worry about. The Holy Tzaddik is safe. He made it through. So I bless you all that whatever type of brachas we need, sometimes maybe we put the tzaddik and we just got to ask. You got to ask even in the craziest situations. May the brachas of all the tzaddikim, may the brachas of all the shvatim, may the brachas of Yaakov Avinu come onto us and to everybody, and have a beautiful, beautiful Shabbos. And don't forget to bless those around you as well.